If you saw a woman being brutalised in the street, being raped, exploited or abused, being made to perform acts that most women would never countenance, would you walk on by? Would you stop and watch? Would you take pleasure in it? I'd hope most people watching would answer no, no, no to all of those. Yet, add a laptop or a phone screen and the veil of anonymity, and suddenly reality changes, even though most people choose not to admit it, even to themselves. Porn has fundamentally changed our society. Today, it is everywhere you look. It curates music videos. It encourages teen girls to buy hyper-sexualized outfits and pout and pose like a Kardashian for strangers on social media. It sees primetime telly getting young wannabes with airbrushed bodies to compete to have sex for our entertainment. It is so normalised, very few people now question it or stop to wonder how it might be affecting their lives, their relationships and society at large. Look, personally, I doubt many women featuring in porn have stable lives or happy mindsets. I would be shocked if any of my friends chose to make adult content. In fact, I would worry they were going through a breakdown or were in desperate financial need and probably required serious intervention. If you found out your daughter, sister, mother or friend was making porn, I expect you too would be concerned. So how come this massive, unregulated industry is growing so fast and influencing so much? Let's look at the damage that has been done since porn came down from magazines on the top shelves of newsagents, since it leapt out from still photography and cheesy cassette tapes sold in shops with curtains behind doors into thumbnails of escalating clickbait, since it stopped being a cliche with a washing machine repairman and became a limitless supply of exploitation, violation, perversion, dehumanization and extreme instant gratification. Let's look at some heartbreaking stats. More than half of under 17-year-old girls polled in a survey for the Daily Mail said they have received anal sex. 85% of teen girls have given oral sex, with more than a third of those girls not even 16. 1/3 of teenage girls who have taken part in sexual activity haven't even had their first kiss. It breaks my heart. Little girls, before they're even fully developed, are ending up in hospital with tears to intimate body parts. The incidence of children sexually assaulting other children has exploded. Rape culture in schools has reached such horrifying levels that a website where school children can share their experiences of rape and assault now has over 50,000 testimonies. This is an epidemic of physical, psychological, sexual and social harm on an industrial scale. If you are a regular user of porn, the truth is you're not just passively observing systemic and willful abuse of women. In my opinion, you are enabling it. You are part of it. Every view and every click feeds a dehumanized system destroying lives. Tell the woman who has had an ex-boyfriend record intimate activity and threaten to post it online that unregulated porn is fine. Tell the woman that has been violently raped, choked, hurt and shamed that unregulated porn is fine. Tell the woman who has been bombarded with explicit pictures and vile verbal abuse that unregulated porn is fine. Because she works in your office. She lives on your street. She's watching this programme. She's presenting this programme. But it's not just about women. What are we doing to boys, to men? Rendering them into primitive beasts in need of constant stimulation, stripping them of their humanity and emotion by telling them it's fine to be nothing more than a phallus. We're bringing up a generation whose innocence has been slaughtered at the altar of boundless adult perversion. Today's question is, should porn be behind a paywall? Well, if you would be worried about putting your bank details into a porn site, questioning whether they would be safe, what does that say about having confidence that the people in the videos you are watching aren't trafficked or blackmailed or extremely vulnerable? Because if you are so worried about the safety of the site that you wouldn't be willing to part with the 16 digits of your account to access it, then you're admitting you could well be enabling exploitation orchestrated by unsavoury characters. You are content with the idea that little tots who should be playing with dollies and action figures can unwittingly access harmful images that will warp their undeveloped minds and leave them vulnerable to the worst forms of abuse. Look, I'm not a prude, far from it. But having spent 2 decades dating, I can tell you attitudes have changed to a frightening, untested and unprecedented level. Modern porn is not benign, harmless fun. It poses the greatest existential threat to cultural mores and social standards hewn over centuries that have allowed man to separate itself from beast, that elevated humans from prehistoric brutes to moral members of a functioning society. This is why we need to talk about porn. A-Levels Day today, so I think it's about time that we talked about university degrees. Yep, university, the best years of your life, they say. I felt almost bereaved when FUNTH came to an end. FUNTH, the month of fun between exams and results that feels like an endless stretch of beer gardens and house parties. I knew I'd never have another 3 years quite like it. I had lived, breathed and loved every second of my course, my campus and my college life. But it really isn't like that for everybody. Plenty of undergrads find themselves lost, isolated, overwhelmed and lonely. Others are underwhelmed with long, languid, lager and liquor-filled terms, learning how to become a louche libertine instead of lapping up lessons in lecture halls. You know, once upon a time, universities were for bibliophiles and boffins, people priming for a profession, be it law or medicine, or dedicated dorks delving deep into a discipline, buried among dusty tomes of various ologies. Grants were available, study was rigorous, prestige was the principal currency. Meanwhile, polytechnics gobbled up the practical, those who were ready to pursue a vocation with vigour. They churned out mechanics, designers, engineers, straight into the arms of industry, honed and hewn into paragons of production. Apprenticeships burnished the trades, furnishing them with fresh hands to plumb, wire and build, earning and learning simultaneously. But then came the 90s and a sleight of hand to paper over the crumbling edifice of manufacturing as imported labour compressed wages and saturated the jobs market. School leavers had nowhere to go. And so education was homogenised and a degree attached to everything, driving NEETs, that's not in employment, education or training, into new institutions mushrooming up in urban batches, drowning unemployment statistics under Mickey Mouse degrees. Everything from circus studies to surfing, football to film, saw debts rack up for certificates barely worth the paper they were printed on. The degree is devalued, they decried. Then fees began to soar, from £1,000 to 3 to 6 to 9. Debt racked up. Loans went unpaid. Desperate scholars took to moonlighting to subsidise study, as study itself became an understudy. Today, the average student debt stretches to tens of thousands, an exorbitant debt, particularly for a Desmond, that's a 2-2 for those who don't know. 10 billion quid of student loans written off last year, with the taxpayer picking up the tab, a cumulative millennium of lecture time translated to nothing. And yet as students collect their results today, record numbers of A grades dished out to assuage pupils denied standard assessment, their soft psyches stroked by sympathetic sirs, universities will struggle to accommodate them all. But is it really worth it for some academic bling and a 3-year bar crawl? Campuses, once hotbeds of Hegelian dialect, have become detention centres of distance learning and dystopian didactics. Free speech under assault, of activists annihilate centuries-old curricula. Pedagogues pilloried for permitting a plethora of thought. Student bodies and unions more concerned with placards and puerile politics than fostering fertile faculties for graduands. Our higher education is at an all-time low. While our little island nation is second in the world only to America for boasting world-leading seats of learning, internationally esteemed institutions pioneering civilization-advancing innovations, the deep fissures are clear for all to see. Nonsensical caps on medics and dentists, while we import doctors from abroad. Astronomical fees for average academia, hiding in plain sight among the red bricks and Russell groups. Yet cast an eye over the cast of 21st century innovators, entrepreneurs and industrialists, and it's hard to find a graduate among them. From Lord Sugar to Sirs Dyson and Branson, even Zuckerberg and Gates. A mortarboard is not necessarily a springboard to become on a board of directors, yet if you find yourself yearning for learning, with a vested interest in staying within the bounds of intellectual endeavour, if you're scintillated by science, enthralled by anthropology, an ardent philosopher, or a pertinacious in the pursuit of a particular profession, live in labs, be buried in books, and profit from preeminent professors. But if you're apathetic, agnostic, or allergic to academia, it's absurd to render yourself grossly indebted for a 3-year bender and a photo with a fake scroll. Looking at black and white photos from 1950s Afghanistan, glamorous women circling garden parties, clutching cocktails in silk-gloved hands, young nurses with hair tumbling over their shoulders, giggling over their stethoscopes, Americans waving from the steps of aeroplanes, optimistic about a new life in a fascinating country. It's hard to imagine the bloody, primitive scenes unfolding there again today. Yet anyone who knows the history of this geopolitical, critical region with its infamously famous hostile terrain knows sepia dreams and a lick of paint barely cover the cracks in a land so deeply fissured. The arbitrary border drawn around Afghanistan a century ago by British colonists has a lot to answer for today. A region riddled with impassable peaks, brutal, perishing winters and broiling 50-degree desert summers dictates its sparsely populated, balkanised demography. The frontiers that schism centuries-old tribal realms now trap within them a simmering pressure cooker of ethnicities and languages, constellated and divided, vying for supremacy across easily seized mountain paths, with remote settlements vulnerable to being conquered by the many warring factions and bubbles of religious extremists that make up the politically volatile mosaic. Afghanistan borders some of the West's most problematic adversaries, Iran, China and Pakistan, all with a cynical and unique stake in the region. A continuous theatre of proxy battles, from communism against capitalism in the Cold War to crusades of westernisation against fundamentalism in recent times. Afghanistan is less a political football and more a geopolitical football pitch. Having invaded the country 2 decades ago to inject stability into the wider region to secure oil supplies, US and UK troops have deserted the nascent democracy, leaving a skeleton of governance whose fragile bones are already petrifying in the searing heat. It was only a matter of time before Al-Qaeda, ISIS and the Taliban circled the carrion, swooping down from the peaks of the Hindu Kush to regroup, recalibrate and reinvade. The resurgent Taliban have overpowered more territory in the last 2 months than when they were toppled 20 years ago. Cities in the north and southwest have been easily recaptured from a weak government with limited authority from Kabul over the disparate tribes scattered across the brutal landscape. Efforts that lasted 20 relentless years and cost 454 British lives have been nullified in mere moments since the plug of military presence was pulled last month. Was it all worth it, is the question on the lips of observers and bereaved families. Today, the nature of the threat has evolved. As the West shirks oil and seeks to unshackle from a historic dependency on capricious caliphates, the resource-rich region is being courted by mineral-hungry China, brokering strategic talks with the Taliban and creating a Venn diagram of onerous collaboration. Re-entering the fray would potentially pit us against much larger forces with limitless resources and unclear intentions. Yet left unattended, the monster we left behind could come back to hunt us with reinvigorated vengeance. Arguments are split over whether boots on the ground would subdue the patina of extremism spreading across the surface and diminish direct domestic threats, or lead to a toxic backlash of reprisals, this time abetted by powerful foreign actors operating from the shadows. One thing is clear. There is little political will or reward for reopening the Pandora's box on either side of the Atlantic. Joe Biden has made clear he will not reverse the withdrawal of US troops, saying the breathtaking $1 trillion spent during and after the conflict and 2,000 lost American lives is enough. It's time for Afghanistan to stand on its own 2 feet, assisted by a remote and largely unmanned supportive air campaign. But as drones pepper targets embedded within the savage mountain range traversing the Pakistani border, Potential cooperation from our Commonwealth cousin is fast slipping away. Training troops and paying soldiers' wages in a country where the average earnings are just $500 a year is proving not to be enough to reinforce a rapidly rotting resistance, as the multiple tentacles from extremist enclaves pick off a ring of instability at the country's fringes to later squeeze and suffocate the middle. As the UK deals with matters of conscience, offering refuge to thousands of Afghan interpreters who worked shoulder to shoulder with our troops, frightened for their families' lives as the Taliban closes in, the larger moral question looms of whether we should have ever abandoned them in the first place. The argument against whether Blair and Bush should have lit the blue torch paper of conflict in this notoriously unstable state has long gone. We did, and the smouldering embers are now being ignited into a blazing inferno by Islamic insurgents. The debate is rapidly moving on to whether or not we are duty-bound to return. Today, we really need to talk about Afghanistan. Born in post-war Britain to serve a population of 49 million, it's now one of the planet's biggest public health services, cited the world over as a paradigm of universal care. Come its centenary, our population could be twice the size and much older, riddled with modern chronic diseases, with a panoply of new drugs and innovative techniques on offer, all with their own price tag. Being one of very few, fully free, nationalised healthcare systems in the world, it is both a national treasure and a worldwide wonder. Yet, some argue it is dangerously bordering on a state religion, impervious to its failings, with agnostics and critics tried as heretics and blasphemers. Yet, while politicians confidently state the NHS is the envy of the world, some parts of the world look upon things rather differently. As debate raged over Obamacare in America, the NHS was held up by some as a preventable disaster. COVID predictions on the European continent cited the UK as the greatest risk due to a healthcare system that labours to be fleet of foot and has half the ratio of beds and doctors to patients as most other European countries. There is, of course, so much to be proud of. Free at the point of access and free of the horrifically dehumanising bureaucracy of bartering for treatment in the middle of a health emergency. But pride can be anathema to progress. And the pandemic has perhaps revealed that the model dreamt up in the last century may require critical care in its own elderly years. Yet today, crucial discourse about the largest state-run body, the arbiters of life and death, is silenced by a cult-like subservience to its existential nature. Anyone who dares mention the P word, privatisation, let alone the I word, insurance, must commit to incantations of hard-working doctors and nurses while clapping on the doorstep as an act of penance. But how can a fully state-backed, chronically under-resourced service get the cash it needs? There are three choices. First, increase taxes, which is politically unpalatable. Second, nick money from other government departments, but the NHS already consumes 1/5 of the entire national budget. The third option is the one nobody dares utter: profits. All too often, a dangerously disingenuous dichotomy is presented by those who dominate the debate. The status quo or an American model, where ruthless capitalists let the poor die of hernias if insurance paperwork isn't up to scratch. But glance at other healthcare systems and you find far more nuance. Hybrid systems that invite patient choice and drive up standards while preserving free access, alongside state-mandated assurances. The pandemic has exposed the perilous position of the UK healthcare system, with its ailments clear for all to see, but lacking an honest consultation, where diagnosis and cure may be found. Today, an almost insurmountable backlog will cost lives. Nightingale hospitals barely opened their doors, while essential outpatient departments gathered dust. Millions paid into the private sector to handle the overflow, but never actually used. We, patients, earnestly put rainbows in our window and wept as we extolled our lifesavers, our NHS. But it doesn't feel like our NHS to the widow whose husband didn't get a diagnosis and now is in the hospital morgue. It doesn't feel like our NHS to the person refused innovative, life-saving medicine, who has to crowdfund to go abroad, where part private healthcare offers a range of treatments a state-backed service simply cannot justify. Whisper it quietly. Perhaps the private sector could be the saviour of the service, not its assassin. Underpaid nurses might find their wages higher and the tools needed for their job more plentiful. While I was hobbling on crutches in Belgium 3 years ago with a broken ankle, strangers crossed the street to ask me which hospital I went to. Notes there on clinics are compared as casually as we chat about the weather. The hospital recommended by my GP, who I could call personally, was so sought after it was building new wings packed with cutting-edge technology. My dinners were served under a cloche. Waiting times were never more than minutes, and the single room I was allocated after emergency surgery was as good as a room at the Ritz. Patient choice had evidently driven competitive standards of care. Yet this is a conversation we're simply not allowed to have, as minor surgery is carried out in prefab huts and hospital car parks, and it can take a whole day just to get through to your GP's receptionist. Meanwhile, some trusts are spending a sixth of their budget on repayment of private sector debts taken in the 90s to build new hospitals. It's not just absurd, but murderous to not be able to discuss critical issues that measure their severity in corpses due to a fear of speaking out. Today, we really need to talk about the NHS. Body modification is as old as humankind. Across centuries, cultures and continents, humans have found innovative ways to adorn and adapt their looks, from tattooing to piercing to elongating necks and ears. So why should we be worried about the prevalence of cosmetic surgery today? Recent videos of Katie Price writhing in pain following a full body and face overhaul in Turkey have been deemed too grotesque to be published on Instagram. When the former model revealed her new look to the world, many were shocked by the extent of the invasive surgery. The pandemic ushered in new ways of working and a breathtaking rise in demand for procedures. The British Association of Aesthetic Plastic Surgeons says doctors have reported up to 70% increases in requests for virtual consultations, with people seeking to take advantage of working from home to have artificial alterations before meeting in person again. But the massive rise has also been put down to something more sinister, a Zoom boom, with people constantly seeing their faces on screens, adding to selfie dysphoria, where filtered, airbrushed versions of reality are distorting perceptions of appearances with dramatic effects. The cosmetic surgery industry in the UK is estimated to be worth over £3 billion. But as the popularity of aesthetic intervention grows, so does the trend for vulnerable people to attempt to solve emotional problems with serious medical procedures. In the UK, surgeons must be able to identify psychological disorders that make a patient unsuitable for treatment. Yet increasingly, surgery tourism enables many Brits to spend thousands on surgeries that don't always go right. The most popular destination is Turkey, where a quick internet search reveals cosmetic surgery holiday packages for people who can't afford a procedure in the UK or would be barred based on their medical and psychological history. Deeply concerning is a report that 4 out of 5 plastic surgeons have noted a frightening increase in patients requiring revision after botched surgery abroad, adding a considerable burden to the NHS to rectify, at times, life-threatening errors. On top of that, a survey back in 2014 revealed 2/3 of women actually regret the procedures they've had. I would imagine that figure today would be even higher. Newspaper columns are filled with examples of extreme makeovers, while hordes of young women are seeking multiple quick fixes to become so many iterations of the same commercial look. These days, to get on reality TV or to become an influencer means getting the same nose, lips, breasts and bottoms that fill the screens of Instagram and TikTok. Yet the more people have access to cheap tweaks, the more extreme the requirements seem to get. The concept of an ideal body is so far removed from what is biological normal, it requires major augmentation to achieve. It's no surprise when the world's most famous family are recognisable for being sucked and stitched together by a team of aestheticians. The Kardashians have cemented the concept that being handmade by medics is not just disturbingly desirable, but perversely profitable. Today, one of the most asked for procedures is the Brazilian bottom lift, a surgery outlawed in the UK for its unethical levels of risk, with a startlingly high death rate of 1 in 3,000, as fat mistakenly injected into large veins can travel to the heart or brain, while scars risk developing flesh-eating necrotizing fasciitis. Cosmetic surgery is no longer a rhinoplasty on someone with a broken or big hooter. It's gone beyond pinning back ears or going up a cup size. Even anti-aging cosmetic processes are now so vastly consumed by youngsters without a wrinkle in sight that legislation has had to be brought in to stop under-18s getting Botox, banning a horrifying 41,000 injections given to children each year. Certain procedures are now so widely available, they're being done at parties in people's living rooms by practitioners with spurious certificates downloaded from the internet. It's clear today we face a real and very troubling question about societal expectations and body dysmorphia, with increasing numbers of celebrities exhibiting taut and ghoulish faces that frankly make them look like the lion in The Wizard of Oz. There are television programmes dedicated to botched operations, but this is no laughing matter. Many surgeons wouldn't dream of cutting someone open without a very real medical need. Yet, in the world of cosmetic surgery, some professionals are enabling people to shockingly distort their bodies and faces when a psychiatrist's couch would be a far better option. The PIP implant scandal revealed there may also be future perils we do not even yet know about. The lasting effects of constant and continuous injections, tweaks, fillers and implants to become a fantasy avatar in order to be happy could create untold future health and mental issues. We really do need to talk about cosmetic surgery.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.